Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, a fantasy platformer, a war game set in feudal Japan, and the first in a long-forgotten racing series from Nintendo. I'm your host, Jared, and today is July 8th, 1992. Thanks to Mario, anything and everything needed to have some kind of platformer game for success and for the kids. Now, many games ripped him off, but there were some other platformer games that were clear inspirations. Take this title, The Viking Child, released for the Game Boy this week in 1992. Its full title, Prophecy 1: The Viking Child, is a platformer originally released for DOS and ported over to Game Boy and the Atari Lynx. In it, you play as the Viking Child, jumping through a cartoony world using a pathetic stab attack and trying to get to the end of the stage. However, unlike most other platformers, you can move left and right and earn money to spend in shops for various upgrades. Of course, the game isn't even a fraction as good looking as its box art. They definitely made it all about the Viking Child for the DOS and Atari Lynx versions, but the Game Boy version, they clearly leaned into the prophecy part of the title. This tells me nothing though. I would think this is like another Shadowgate kind of game or something. Like I said, a lot of companies were fine with ripping off Mario and calling it a day. They didn't do that here. Instead, the Viking Child is derivative of another youthful platformer game, Wonder Boy in Monsterland, for the Sega Master System. If the attack animation in platforming didn't make it clear enough for you, the shops definitely do. How this didn't lead to a lawsuit, I'm not really sure. Probably because nobody cares about the Viking Child. And that's not just me saying that. Nintendo Power reviewed the Game Boy version of the game with an average score of a 2.7 out of 5 from Nintendo, trying to sell games for their own hardware. As was implied by the extended title, there was to be a Prophecy 2, but that's never seen the light of day. You can play Prophecy 1, The Viking Child, right now because somebody made it available to play on Steam. However, as of this video, it currently has 4 reviews, so I wouldn't bet on that sequel anytime soon. One of my favorite things about doing this show is being able to learn and talk about all kinds of underappreciated games on underappreciated consoles. Take this game, released this week in 1992, is Lords of the Rising Sun for the TurboGrafx CD. Originally released a few years earlier for home computers, Lords of the Rising Sun is a strategy action game. It has 3 playable characters with their own stories. Most of it is typical turn-based strategy stuff with moving units and checking territories and all that. However, the game turns to something else when battle occurs. From here, you'll send your units at each other, and sometimes you ride on a horse yourself, cutting down enemies before you. And then when you attack castles, you play in a top-down, almost Zelda-like game to take it over within a time limit. But when your castle gets invaded, you swap to a first-person archery defense minigame. There's a lot going on here. Most of it plays pretty poorly. I will applaud it for having a lot of variety for a strategy game, and I'm not alone in that. GamePro reviewed Lords of the Rising Sun in issue 38, noting its frustrating control, but apparently incredible sound design. The legacy of this game can still be seen today. 1 year later, it was ported over to the CDI, and popular strategy series Total War has outright stated one of their biggest inspirations was Lords of the Rising Sun. And now for something that might be a little painful. A racing series from Nintendo that hasn't seen a new iteration since the early 2000s. Yeah, I'm talking about Wave Race. Wave Race started for the Game Boy, where you race around on jet skis. It's seen from the top-down view as you go against 3 other racers, riding around the track while passing smiley-face buoys to make sure you aren't cutting across the water. There's even obstacles like jumps and mini whirlpools and power-ups you can grab, like a slower, dumber Mario Kart. And that's pretty much it. The gameplay is slow, and you can finish an entire Grand Prix in less than 10 minutes. There's also limited sound effects and no music during the races, so it's not an exciting experience by any means. However, Wave Race had a major selling point. It was one of only 10 games released in the West that could use the Game Boy multiplayer link cable for 4-player multiplayer.
There's a lot of games here. A lot.
I got kicks, man. Kicks. This is a game. This is the game.
Game Boy's
Game Boy's genius. It's
Wave Race went on to sell over 1 million copies and even got a Player's Choice re-release. And I'm assuming most people got it because they really wanted to try that 4-player Game Boy thing. Wave Race would of course go on to have 2 sequels. Wave Race 64 was released for the Nintendo 64 in 1996, and Wave Race Blue Storm was released for the Nintendo GameCube in 2001. And since then, the most we've seen of Wave Race is some of the 64 racers showing up as spirits in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Wave Race producer Shinya Takahashi teased that there could be a new Wave Race game in 2018, possibly for the Nintendo Switch. Now since then, not a single word, and it's been 4 years, so let's be real, nothing's gonna happen.
Editor Dylan here. The only other game released this week was Arch Rivals, a typical basketball game for the Sega Genesis, and it's no NBA Jam. But at least you could punch and tackle your opponents to immediately steal and dunk the ball at the start of each game. Fun fact, this strategy worked 90% of the time and basically removed any challenge. Side note, I recorded this on my birthday, and I want to thank you for all the positive feedback, which helps us continue to improve this show. But enough about that, we have a total of 4 games releasing this week, consisting of 2 Game Boy games, 1 Genesis game, and 1 Turbo CD game. A rare example of a week without an NES or an SNES game. Now Jared's gonna throw some numbers at you.
Over in the collector's corner, Prophecy 1 The Viking Child goes for just under $25 loose. But if you got the box and manual, it's over $100 complete. Obscurity be like that sometimes. Lords of the Rising Sun is a rare example of a game whose loose and complete value are nearly identical. A loose cartridge is worth about $54, and the box and manual brings it up to $57. It has the closest value of games we've ever covered. Wave Race's loose value has completely dried up. It goes for less than $10, putting it amongst the cheapest Game Boy games. Even complete isn't much better at less than $50. Even worse, the complete version of the rarer Player's Choice version is less than $40. And that's it for today. Next week we'll have some fishing, an obscure RPG for the Game Boy, and one of the most impactful, industry-defining games ever released comes to home consoles. I'm Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. Please like the video and subscribe if you aren't already. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much, and thanks for leaving a comment down below. Also, I want to let you know that if you ever like any of the shirts that I am wearing on the show, check out Vapor95. That's where I get them all. And if you go to vapor95.com/projared, you can use my discount code for a little bit off.